Well, Kevin, welcome to Inside the 90. This is the podcast where we want to dig into the pains and strains that turned into gains by choosing to live in a 90-day world. And so just really want to dive deep into that conversation. So let's just open it up with, tell us where your EOS journey began.
Sure. Happy to. And thanks for having me on, Jami. I'm looking forward to it for sure. So for me, just to kind of start the journey, I work for a company called Kopis. We're a technology services provider focused on Microsoft, ERP, Power Platform, cloud, application development. I've been there for 13 and a half years, started more in the technical engineering, got brought up into a management team whenever we decided that was the next best move for the company. And right about that time, our CEO also decided that we really needed an operating system to run our business. And at the time, I don't think we knew it was an operating system. It was just kind of we need a more formal structure of how we conduct ourselves. We actually started on the Scaling Up book, if you've ever heard of that one. It's based on the Rockefeller principles, and it's reads kind of like a manual, like a textbook, almost like so it's very, very dry, very highly structured, lots of nuance and detail. But we started down that path. They had a one-page strategic plan, was their version of the EOS VTO. So we had a little bit of experience kind of figuring out some of that stuff. And then our CEO had a mentor actually that his company had just switched to running on EOS. They read traction. They started to implement it. They found an implementer. And he said, hey, you guys should look at this. So our CEO, and this is funny, this is probably the time that we knew he was the visionary and I was the integrator. Yeah. He took the book from his mentor, the traction book. He didn't even open it. He just handed it to me and said, hey, check this out and see if you think this will work.
Pretty good visionary tale.
So I read the book and I was like, man, it's actually really similar to the Rockefeller thing that we were doing with Scaling Up. But I felt like it spoke to me a little more, felt a little simpler to put in place. Little did I know I was wrong, that it was simple. I thought it was simple, not as simple as it may seem. Yeah. But anyway, so we started down that path and converted our one-page strategic plan, used that as kind of a basis to start the VTO, and really started our journey there. So that was around 2017 is when we started doing that, and we were fully self-implemented.
What size organization did y'all have back then, and how long had y'all been in business?
Yeah, so company started in 99. We were a very flat CEO, everyone else organizational structure until 2014. Okay. So I started with the company in 2011. So I'd been there for about 3 years, and our CEO decided he needed to add some layers and to basically to delegate some of the things that he had kept control of for a long time, because he had come to the conclusion that the fact he was holding on to everything was holding the business back from growing. Yeah, so
he had hit that proverble ceiling.
The ceiling. And he had hit the ceiling, I think, a while ago, and it just took him a while to kind of come to that conclusion. And I think part of it was too, he was the founder and had been through a lot, and so it's sometimes hard to kind of let go of your baby, so to speak. Yeah. So that was 2014 that we started changing that structure, and when we started EOS in 2017, coming into 2017 actually, I think we were probably around 20 people then. I don't remember the exact number, but somewhere around 20. And now we're just under 100.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Really cool. As far as when you first started rolling it out internally, what did that look like? Did you start with just the leadership team?
Yep.
How did you transition to the whole organization?
Yeah, so this is one of the places that in hindsight should have been pretty obvious that we didn't know what we were doing. So I would say from 2017 until 2021, if you had asked 90% of our company what EOS was, they wouldn't even be able to tell you, right? So they had no idea. So we did a really poor job of our executive team, had a pretty good, we're doing L10s and we're doing annual planning, but really nothing was going from there out to the rest of the company. And so I heard a phrase at one of my community sessions last year that, we shouldn't talk about pushing EOS down throughout the organization. We should talk about pulling other people in, right? So we're pulling them in. Yeah. We're trying to include them and bring them into the fold. Pushing is a little more authoritative, and it's less kind of teamwork, right? Yeah. So we in 2023 is when I really actually started occupying that integrator seat. And a big part of that was, okay, we clearly haven't done a good job of rolling this out more broadly. So how can we kind of stair step our way into that? What are the key components we want to make sure get trickled down first, and then kind of go from there and build on it.
What were those indicators when y'all were, decided to implement EOS internally, right? You taking on the position, the visionary,
Yep.
like what were the things that you immediately realized, like, oh, wow, these are our gaps right now?
Yeah. So when we first started with EOS, it was as simple as we'd never really put on paper a way to articulate who we were as a company. So the culture and the mindset that we were intended to operate with was all in Andy's head, our CEO, and he knew exactly. You could give him a scenario and he'd say, this is how I want us to do it. But nobody else really had that ability to get a kind of a concise, on paper, who are we, what do we do, why are we here? And so that exercise of that front page of the VTO, setting up the vision, that was huge for us. So it took us, and we started it during that scaling up process, but I think it probably took us the better part of 4 years to really, from one session to the next, review those core values. It's actually a really funny story. Our first crack at core values, we came up with 37 of them. So now, again, looking back on it, at the time we're like, yeah, this is great. These are all right.
Do you have an acronym for that?
so then we realized, we probably need to figure this out. So where we actually had started was behaviors. So the way that we kind of led through the organization was, all right, let's look at people that we believe are truly Kopis people. What are the things that they do that make them a Kopis person, right? So we started just writing down how they talk to customers, how they make promises, how they have an ownership mentality. So we just behavior.
Yeah.
And then over the course of 4 years, we started to, and again, it was a EOS term that we didn't know at the time, but effectively kill, keep, combine, right, from those 37. And ultimately really almost oversimplified it into 4 words, right? So now I've come to realize it doesn't have to be 4 words. It can be 4, phrases.
Yes, ideas.
But 4 ideas.
4 things people can rally around.
Yep. So we're 4 words, and I think we finalized the kind of 4-word mentality probably 2018 or 19, and since then, we have really put them to the test. And so one of the phrases we've used and heard a lot is true test of your core values is, do you stick to them when it's hard?
Yeah.
Will you pay the consequence and take the pain as an organization to make sure that you are who you are? So we've put those 4 core values to the test, and we have not found a scenario yet that those 4 didn't guide us kind of in the right direction. Yeah. So
was that from Andy as the founder and CEO of the company? Were values something that he understood and everything before y'all got to that point? Or did he, was he like, could he kind of describe like, this is what I like? Or was it really a frustration point? And then once the clarity came from shaping those, he really rallied around them.
Yeah, I think, again, I think in his mind, it was just obvious who we are, right?
Yeah.
Because he's been in it, he's the founder and he's the leader of the company and has done all the things. So I think to him, it was just kind of obvious that this is how we should treat clients. This is how we should treat our employees, because this is how I've always treated clients and employees, right? But again, we kind of had gotten to the point where we had grown a little bit more than just, Andy couldn't have control over everything anymore, where he could exude those values everywhere.
Yeah.
So it was really important as a business that we could kind of spread that understanding out. So I don't think he had really gone through a core values exercise and trying to put it on paper until we did that as a team. Now I do think he was very decisive about, yes, this is something that we want, or no, it is not.
Yeah.
So I think he had clarity, but just had not gotten to the point of putting it on paper.
Yeah. What so that was 4 years from the time you started to you got those crystallized.
Yep.
What did it look like to then roll those out? And what was kind of that?
Yep.
Really getting traction with the values by themselves. What did that look like?
Yeah. So that's one of the rollouts I think we actually did really well. So, and over the course of those 4 years, the reason it took so long is we kept testing and testing and testing. And if we didn't have an answer from the values that we had set, or we didn't feel like it really laid it out well or clearly answered the question, then we would say, okay, how do we need to tweak our core values? Because
Yeah.
this is something we definitely want to be covered. So, so once we got to the point where we all felt really confident that those values were the values, we did a bunch of things. I'm trying to remember all of them now, but so we were already doing a company quarterly, state of the company in EOS terms, but just a company quarterly update. Where are we as a business? What are we doing well? What are we struggling with? How healthy are we? New hires, all that stuff. And we use that as an opportunity to go through in pretty good depth, led by Andy, our CEO, what our core values were, what they mean to him and why, and what they mean to the business. And then we actually also followed up with I'm trying to remember how long he stuck to this, but he was sending out, I think it was a weekly for a while and then shifted to a monthly, basically a core values email to the whole company. Hey, this is a core value. Here's some specific examples of what this means and how it exhibits itself. Sometimes it'd even be a story of this was a scenario we ran into. This is how we handled it. This is an example of how we see the core value. So that was, I think it went really well. I think the way we described that, the feedback from the company was all really positive. They got it. They understood. I think where maybe we could have done a little better is the do you make all decisions based on core values, right? So is it clear when you reward somebody that you're rewarding them because they followed a core value really well?
Yeah.
Is it clear when you're disciplining somebody that you're disciplining them because they're out of alignment with a core value? So there was a little interim period there where I think our core values were pretty set, but we didn't use them in all the situations that we probably could have. And so we recognized that, and again, it was maybe a year or two had gone by, and then we recognized, hey, let's really, really pull those core values into almost every discussion that we have. So if there's ever a point where we're sitting there and we're thinking, this is a problem and we got to figure out how to solve it, it's okay, what do our core values tell us we should do, right?
Do you remember, without putting a spotlight on anyone, but do you remember an early stage where you really had a problem and you pointed to the values and y'all looked at it and you found your answer?
Yeah, we so maybe to help our 4 core values. Lead. I
was going to actually be I'm
lead.
going to put you on the spot. Do you know them? What are those 4 values?
Yes, I do. Lead, impact, respect, and simplify.
Okay.
So those are our 4 core values. We find them to apply not just to how we work with clients, how we work with our team, but also how we're trying to impact the community as well. So to us, they've been able to apply in every scenario that Kopis touches. So without giving a whole ton of detail, very early on in this process, we went through an acquisition where one of the sort of skeletons in the closet, if you will, from the acquisition was a hidden cost that was pretty significant on the other side. And we basically had a choice to either, as a company, follow the fact that if we decided to not do it, or have an employee maybe bear the burden of that financial hit, the impact on them, the impact on the team around them, and the fact that we really do have a lot of respect for our team and understanding that they have a lot going on in their lives, and that we just don't want to treat people that way, right? So from our perspective, it was like, whose fault is this really, right? So nobody ever does a perfect due diligence.
Correct, yeah.
There's always something that you miss.
Can't ask every question.
In theory, it's something that we could have figured out, right?
Yeah.
So it didn't seem right. It didn't seem like the right thing to do to either cause somebody else to bear the burden or to have a huge impact on a person or a team based on something that we potentially would have had control over.
Yeah.
So even though it was very painful, obviously not to the point of like destroying the business, but it was a painful financial, and we stuck to the core value and just figured out a way to make it work, and kept the team, intact, and the chemistry was good, and that has 100% been the right decision all along. We've never looked back and regretted it once.
And was that a decision you made based on the values and it stayed internal as to the why, or did you actually lean on the values and say, based on this, we're letting everybody know what we're doing?
Yeah. I think we had a light conversation, pretty much at the level we just did,
gotcha.
right? Just to say, hey,
yeah.
look, we were stuck in a pretty tight spot, but our core values are really important.
Yeah.
And to some degree, in return, we ask that the team also understand, hey, now the company needs your help to help make sure that we perform well, right, and that we do our jobs well. So it wasn't. one of the ways we describe our lead core value is humble leadership, right? So to us, like going out and saying to the team, hey, the company just did this for you is not really humble leadership,
great.
right?
Yeah,
So we tried to frame it in a way to say, look, we need you guys to understand that these core values really mean something and they mean something to us. So it was more about reinforcing the core values than it was about, hey, pat me on the back because we made a good decision that helped somebody out, right? So that was pretty much how it went, and the people that were involved and all the feedback we had at the time was very positive, and it really did help reinforce our core values and how important they were.
Awesome. From a when y'all rolled those out, and now from a recruiting perspective and hiring, what role do those values play?
Huge. So we do some really interesting things with the recruiting process that are a little different. But a big part of that is trying to understand how somebody aligns with core values very, very early in the process. So one of the things that we do that's different, and I hate to give away some of our secret sauce here on the podcast, but so we have an in-house recruiter, and she's great at doing an initial screen. We'll look at resumes and history, and then she'll jump on the phone and just light question and answer, make sure that everyone can communicate well. But the next step after that is that she and I actually, and this is for every hire, regardless of the role in the company, she and I take them to coffee. And she preps them and says, look, this coffee is about your chance to learn more about Kopis in this role, and we're going to answer all your questions. So just come prepared, right?
Yeah.
So we get to sit down, we get to enjoy a coffee, and then we get to know the person based on the questions that they ask, and it's very conversational.
And is that interview stage or after their
interview
stage?
This is interview
once
stage.
Someone's a qualified candidate.
So we prioritize the core values culture fit over the skill fit.
Okay.
So because at this point I can't possibly gauge the skill level of basically anybody.
Yeah.
But what I do know really well is our core values and our culture as a company. So and I know the history and the background and all the things that we do. So I can answer most questions, not all the questions, but yeah, so we'll sit at coffee and again, based on the types of questions that they ask and how specific they are, how detailed they are, how deep they are, right? Did they just go to ChatGPT and ask, hey, what's 5 good questions to ask at a job interview? So we can kind of tell not just the depth, but how articulate are they? Because we're a fully client-facing company. We don't have a single person in our company I wouldn't put in front of a client. Yeah. So basically, how well can you communicate? How thoughtful are you? Sometimes, depending on the role and the person, we'll actually intentionally put a little pressure on them and just kind of see how they respond. I mean, nothing disrespectful, obviously, because that would be against core values. But definitely, to try to understand, give us examples of times that they had a leadership opportunity and how they took advantage of it, right? Or a time that they recognized an impact on a situation and they again took that opportunity to heart to make a bigger impact, or and some of them kind of roll together. I would say that the uniquely Andy one is our simplify core value. So he went on a Einstein quote kick for a little while a few years ago, and one of them was, oh gosh, I'm going to butcher this. It's along the lines of you should always use the simplest solution possible, but no more so, right? So effectively, you have the simplest that will work, right? So you don't want to oversimplify to the point that it doesn't actually solve the problem you're trying to solve, but you also don't want to overcomplicate things. So
just fight complexity.
So in being in the technology industry, it's the old over-engineering thing, right? It's the horror stories that people hear all the time. And one of the fun kind of ways to describe it that we give is, and we're located in downtown Greenville. It's, if you're in our office and you're telling us that you really need to get to Malden, are we gonna build you a bicycle, or are we gonna architect a space shuttle? Right? I mean, and what's really the best thing that will get you there? And sometimes we need to know, well, I need to get to Malden today, but tomorrow I need to get to Spartanburg. Right? So now it's okay. How can we start a simple foundation that can get us to Malden, but with enough there that we can build on it to get you to Spartanburg, right? And then further from there.
Very good. So it sounds like from a VTO perspective, right people, right seats, core values, like that was your really beginning to get some traction. Once you had that, what were the other parts of the VTO that really started to get some clarity?
Yeah. So I guess in terms of the VTO, The other ones that we've always struggled with were, we took hold of the passion, purpose versus mission, vision.
Yeah.
But our passion has kind of shifted around a little bit over the years where, and I'm trying to remember the exact kind of nature of it, but it was like, at first it was about, we love to use technology to help solve business problems, right? Because we really love that, but that's not really why we're here, right? And then it became, no, it's actually about, being a place that the best want to work. It's about being a great company that people want to work at. But then we were like, well, but we also love helping our clients succeed, right? So, and now we've iterated to the point where it's effectively rolls all those things together, and it's effectively our passion and why we exist is to help both our clients and our employees to continuously grow. And that's really what it comes down to. So, and to us, that speaks to, we're trying to lead our clients and have an impact on their business and allow them to grow and improve. But at the same time, our employees are also really important, and we want to make sure that they're on a career trajectory and a path that's really good for them too.
That's really cool. What, as far as breaking that down, because we've got a pretty good time span here.
Yep.
Talk about what 90 days has looked like and how that's impacted the culture.
Yeah. So one of our problems, going all the way back to when we started the whole operating system journey with that scaling up, was we have got a really, really bright team in general, not just executive team, but team in general. Lots of ideas, lots of great conversations, lots of, we spend an hour at a whiteboard thinking about how we could do something, and then it just stayed on the whiteboard. So basically, that shift to the 90-day focus really helped us to focus on some of the bigger picture items. So effectively, what was happening is we were so caught up in the day-to-day churn of being reactive and trying to help keep things moving forward, just day-to-day, that we didn't quite have the focus we wanted or needed on, the bigger picture, the things that we needed to move to be where we wanted to be in 5 years, not just in 5 weeks. So that 90-day picture, and it definitely took a lot of iterating to get better at that too. So out of the chute, we had really crappy defined rocks. We had way too many rocks. We had quarters where one person had 9 rocks and one person had 1 rock, and it was like, this doesn't feel right. So eventually what we realized was, from a rock perspective, the simpler and more focused and more specific you can be, the more it's going to execute, more you're going to execute it, and the bigger impact it's actually going to have. So back when beginning of 23, when I officially took on the Integrator seat, that was one of our focuses was, hey, let's really, really work hard to make sure that our rocks are defined well. And really through the whole course of 2023, we had the highest rock completion that we'd had ever. Part of that too was we did start to pull in some others. So part of our lack of getting things off the whiteboard was our executive team was pulled in a lot. We had our hands in a lot of different directions, a lot of fragmentation. So we brought in the next layer of leaders and said, hey, we need your help to execute on these company rocks. And they were all very disciplined, process-oriented, very goal-oriented people. And so when you tell them, hey, I need this rock completed this quarter, that they're going to complete it. So that helped a lot too. But even that, our executive team still had rocks, and it was almost like we got pushed by them because we knew they were going to complete theirs. So we had to kind of keep up. So what was interesting though is the other thing we learned that year is, for us specifically, we have to be really careful about the Q4 rocks. And it's probably the same for a lot of people because you have things like, year-end budgeting for the next year. And in Q4, there's holidays scattered all over Q4. And so
and you still have sales goals.
Yes. So exactly. So we found that we were basically trying to carry the same rock load every quarter. And then the first thing we realized was Q4 was not a good time to take on a normal rock load. It was, hey, let's pare this down. What's like the one most important thing, outside of all the budgeting and planning and things and hitting our sales targets? What is the one most important thing? Let's start there. Is that enough? Right.
That's interesting because I would think a lot of people get to the end of the year and they're like, we got to have all these rocks to start next year really strong, right?
That was how we were doing things, and then we realized that we'd have great completion percentage, and then Q4 would just flop. So the other one that we found now is and this may be more specific to us because we have our summer months. So the Q3, early part of Q3, mid part of Q3, we tend to have tons of travel, some personal, summertime, kids and stuff. But for whatever reason, we also seem to have a lot of conferences that hit in that kind of June, July.
Oh, June, July.
Yeah.
Okay,
so that June, July, even into like early August timeframe.
Okay.
So naturally, all that travel, we tend to not be together as much. We tend to kind of not have as much time to move things forward. So basically what we've learned is most of our rocks have to be completed in the first half of the year, really, because we know that Q3 and Q4 tend to be slower in terms of getting some of that progress done, just based on how it goes for us.
So what's really cool about that is, y'all have had some perseverance. You've allowed the iterations 90 days by 90 days to work, right? You've got a long enough history to get predictable. It sounds like, hey, our business has these cycles and our bad performance on our rock has these cycles. So let's balance those two things out a little bit.
Well, it's interesting. One of the I'll call it a trigger, but one of the triggers at the end of 2022 that really caused us to refocus was we had some pretty bad issues about rocks that would just carry over. And yes, it's still important, but we didn't get it done and still important. And I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say that some of those were on there for like 8 or 9 straight quarters. And it was like, what are we doing wrong?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the, how do we fix this was, well, we need to put more attention on how are we actually implementing EOS? How are we staying disciplined? How are we being consistent?
Yeah.
And who's going to enforce that? Because, who's going to enforce that, right? So back in 2017 when we started, and I mentioned the whole visionary drops the book on the Integrator's desk. So we didn't even know, and then we read Rocket Fuel after that. So I was kind of the pseudo integrator. So we were like, yeah, you're the right guy for but I had so many other tasks on my plate that we never really talked about what that meant and made the right amount of time to actually do it. So as much as I'd love to say I've been the integrator since 2017, I don't think that's really accurate. I've tried to help the process and we've all kind of worked together, but that's, another reason that it's taken us so long to really get to a decent point with our EOS rollout in general.
Well, it sounds like, Andy hit the visionary ceiling first, right? He's like, we need to do something different.
Yep.
And then you hit the integrator ceiling where it's like, all right, now what we have to do is actually have a formal integrator, right?
Yep.
And I know y'all, most of that journey you were self-implementing.
Yep.
So tell us where you are now.
Yeah. So we have finally, after all this time, onboarded an implementer for the first time. And we are actually really excited about that. So one of the other things, so when we did commit to that integrator seat in 2023, one of the other things that became really obvious is it was very difficult to both plan and facilitate the quarterly and annual sessions and be a thoroughly engaged participant.
Correct.
Right. So, and we I don't think this is super unique, but during those processes, we try to build in a little buffer to actually allow ourselves to go down some rabbit holes. So we have to, it's a little bit of an art to decide how long to let it go.
Yeah.
But over the years of doing those planning sessions, there have been so many times where, you start on a topic that probably should be a 15-minute topic and we end up spending 90 minutes on it. But in the 89th minute, some brilliant thing happens and we go, holy cow, I'm so glad we talked about this. So we try to be a little bit more lenient from that perspective. But again, as an integrator and that kind of structured, process-oriented personality, you're thinking, well, I'm watching the clock. We're supposed to be doing the next segment now, and we're still in this conversation. So what do we do? And so I've, over the last couple of years, the ones that I've run, I've tried to have a little bit looser of an agenda, and we ended up kind of stretching. But what's interesting is, in talking to the implementer, they're like, no, you don't do that. Just stick to the plan. Yeah. If it's not part of the plan,
tangent, drop it down.
Table it for the issues discussion. Or, and in this case, this year, it's actually going to work out really well. So we have a new member of our executive team that just started 2 weeks. Tomorrow will be her second week completed. So that plus implementer. We actually have 2 days of annual planning, but then we have booked a full third day as kind of the follow-up for some of the things I know we normally would have deep dive on.
A little bit of let the air out.
Yes. And it's also, again, with a new executive team member, with a new implementer, it's also a chance just to kind of debrief on the process and anywhere that we're still kind of uncomfortable with. And the other part of it will be if there are specific EOS tools through this process that we're like, hey, this one's really important because of where we are and we haven't done it well, that extra day as just the executive team without the implementer, we'll try to work through those tools a little bit more.
Well, what good transition to tools. Of the 20 tools, the EOS tools, which ones do you have found that you just grab hold of? You're like, they've been life-changing.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the meeting pulse, the 90 day, the rock view, basically. Those two definitely stand out. I would love to say Scorecard because I think it's super important, but that's probably the one that we're doing the worst right now, which is.
Wait. Aren't y'all a data and analytics company?
So that's the problem. It's not just that, but that's my background. So I
think Power BI can help with that. Right?
Exactly. So so my background actually was I worked at a K through 12 data warehousing and SaaS product company for a few years, and then worked at a startup doing web scraping, ETL, data analysis, reporting. When I came to Kopis, I was doing enterprise database administration and actually pitched Andy on creating a BI practice at Kopis and then said, hey, I can run it. I can lead it. Just let me go, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that here we are and maybe one of our weakest, most important components is the scorecard is very painful. But I think we have, and this is where our implementer is going to help immensely to guide because we are, so 3 out of the now 4 executive team members were engineers.
Okay.
So our biggest problem with the scorecard has been over-engineering it. It's been overthinking, over-calculating, trying to handle too many scenarios instead of just like, hey, let's simplify. And that's our core value, simplify, right? So we've tried to how do we boil this down? But we just, we haven't come to the right kind of consensus on what the right numbers are and how to measure them. So we do actually plan over the next quarter to refocus on that and more specifically getting those scorecards out throughout the whole team.
Gotcha.
So we have some dashboards and some metrics that we look at as an executive team as part of our weekly L10s that are pretty good, but they're not perfect and they're not even great. They're just pretty good. So we know we need to iterate that to be a little bit more leading, a little bit more have we had a good week, right? So right now they're a little bit more monthly tied. So our billing cycles are all monthly. So we're constantly trying to track hey, how are we performing, we think, to date this month versus what we expected. So we're trying to figure out how to kind of pivot a little bit more into did we have a good week or did we not?
Okay. Just plug here. Are you using 90 or a software to manage that? Okay.
Yep, we are.
Right.
So we started, that was also a big change for us. So we had the old Word template VTO, and then, we had this brilliant idea of hey, we really should have a traction page for each one of the departments, right? So they can come up with their own annual goals and it will all tie back. And so here I am as the integrator trying to figure out how to get all this stuff into this Word document, and then it's got to share to all these people, but we don't want to share the whole thing because, I don't know, we didn't feel like that was right either, And so we were like, man, we're just, and we knew we needed to bring more people into that L10 experience. So I'm trying to remember how long ago, maybe a year and a half ago, we pulled the trigger. And it took us a while to roll it out. So we first started using it with the executive team, and then that sort of next layer of leaders, they started to use it. And then we actually pivoted from them having their own leadership group to, no, let's really follow the departmental model. And so we broke out into departments, and then those kind of departmental leadership teams, they started using 90. And then the last step was, okay, let's get the rest of the team, kind of the for us, for the developers and some of the folks that aren't in that leadership or management chain, let's pull them into it and get them exposed as well. And we're still not perfect with that. I mean, not that anybody is, but so continue to push consistency. Does everybody use it the same way? Are we all, scoring the meetings? Are we all capturing issues well? So, one of the big tips, we're, being a highly professional services company, time is really, really valuable to us. So one of the things I got hung up on was, hey, I've got a developer who, is on a project that he needs to bill 40 hours to or work 40 hours on this week. Am I going to take 90 minutes every week away from that? That doesn't seem to make sense from a business perspective. So So through some, again, community and chatting with, I think it was one of the implementers actually talked to me about this, but 90 minutes at the executive team level, 60 minutes at the leadership team level, 30 minutes everywhere else, and just pare it down. I think we've found some interesting techniques to try to like speed up segue and speed up some of those things. And really for me, the key things were having that feedback mechanism for issues and make sure that we're focused on our metrics and scorecards and our rocks, right? So to me, it was let's make sure that the team has visibility into those things because that's what's really going to help us to move forward.
Very cool. What, I want to give your implementer a plug, but to lead up to that, tell us about, what was the decision of now is the time? And then what process did you go through? And then why did you choose the implementer that you did?
Yeah. So good question. So so back in 2022, when I was starting to kind of observe some of the areas that we were struggling with and recognize that we really we weren't putting enough attention on how we had implemented EOS. I think that's when I first started getting the feeling of, hey, this would go a lot better if we had an implementer, right? So that was end of 2022. At the time, it was, hey, it's a lot of money. I mean, implementers would admit themselves that their services are expensive, right? But they're very valuable. So basically, at the time, it was we weren't ready to commit fully to an implementer from an expense standpoint. So it was, okay, how do we close the gap? So I went to the EOS conference that year was in Indianapolis in 2023, did some training courses, got tapped into the community a little bit more. And the deeper that I got in my understanding, the more I was like, whoa, we really need some help.
Yeah.
And the more people I talked to that self-implemented and then brought in an implementer, they were like, dude, you need to get an implementer. I mean, it didn't take me long to be convinced.
Yeah.
So I think I came back from that very first EOS conference that I went to that April, and I was trying to formulate how do I talk to Andy about this in a way that will get him on board, right? It wasn't that hard. I mean, I just kind of was like, hey, the way I went about it was I knew what I had seen at that conference, and I knew that it would have a similar impact on Andy, and I knew outside of that it would be difficult to have that big of an impact. So basically, I wasn't even the conference wasn't even over, and I said, Andy, I really think you need to come to this next year. So he. And they open up tickets sales on the last day. We bought our tickets, booked our hotels before the last day of the conference was even over.
Yeah.
So that was, and so 2023, I improved a lot in my understanding and ability to implement things. And we definitely moved the needle pretty far, but still not to a great place, but just far from where we were. So, there's kind of a funny story in here about how, at the end of 2023, after we'd made all this progress, I'm speaking for Andy, and that's dangerous, but he or I would have probably said, hey, it feels like we're 75, 80% of the way there, and we're doing good. And then he came to actually take that back, step in between. On the plane out to the EOS conference in April, so he'd already read Traction. He'd been part of this for a long time, but he got turned on to the what the heck is EOS because we were told like, hey, just let have the company read it so they can understand. And he was like, well, I want to read it first. So he said, I read what the heck is EOS, and I said we should probably hold off and having the company read it until we're actually doing these things. So he before the conference moved that 80% probably to like a 60%. Yeah. And then we sat in the conference, and that 60 became about a 40.
Wow.
And he's not wrong. But at the end of 2022, we were probably about a 10, right? Yeah. So I mean, we'd moved the needle a lot, but we still were in a what we would call a failing grade from how far we'd gone. So.
But it's that whole. I mean, y'all's story is incremental traction, right? Yeah. It's perseverance. It's That's committing. Right. And and just letting that traction happen.
Yep. So I think it was the first day of that conference in San Diego this year that Andy and I were having a drink at the bar to kind of debrief, and he says, "Hey, I think we need to get an implementer." And I was like, "Yep, I couldn't agree more. How do we do that?" Right? So we had a number of other things that we were also trying to deal with at the time. So it wasn't, and our intent immediately was can we try to set this up in a way that come annual planning, we can get somebody engaged that can help start us down the right path for 2025, let us kind of fight through what we're fighting through for now, and then figure out over the next few months how to onboard somebody for, basically for 2025. So what I did a couple things, but one of them was I had I'll call her a mentor. She'd probably appreciate that. But I went and did the Integrator Masterclass. So Rocket Fuel University hosts a class where you can spend a day and they really teach you a lot of stuff about, it's really all EOS centric. And it's how to be the best integrator you can be, but it also ties you into other integrators in the community, hear each other's stories, understand where people learned, right? So where did you fail and then figure it out, and what did you do to fix it? So it was an absolutely incredible learning experience, which included I think it was a 3-hour IDS with, I think, a room full of integrators doing a 3-hour IDS. I think we got through something like 56 or 57 issues in 3 hours. I mean, it was shocking, but her name is the person who led that masterclass was Sue Hawks. She's a expert EOS implementer with EOS Worldwide, and she's got her own company and her own brilliant stuff that she puts out. But she's great. And I actually
shout out to Sue.
Yeah, Sue. Hey, Sue. Love you, Sue. So she and I had a conversation at the end of that day, and I said, hey, these are some of the things we're struggling with. And this was, so Andy and I had that drink in April of 2024. This is the conversation I had with Sue in July of 2023. Hey, I think we need an implementer.
Yeah.
Who do you know that would be down in South Carolina that could help us? And so she sent a handful of recommendations. And then we also, because we are client focused and a lot of our clients are in the regional area around South Carolina, we knew that a handful of them were also running on EOS and had used implementers. So we kind of started to talk to folks. And then Andrew, who we ended up using as our implementer, was actually in our building. So
awesome.
he was a very recent. He's not been in Greenville a real long time. Really deep background, and so there definitely was some bonus points for him in the fact that he was local, and it was very convenient to get together in person with him and get to know him. So, and then on top of that, just kind of I'll call it the cultural fit of where his background came from, what he's focused on, how he communicates. We are a group that really requires someone who can have discipline and push us, right? Yeah. And he is not soft. So that fits us pretty well. So but very respectful. But
aligns with your core value.
We'll shoot you straight, right? Yeah. But we also talked to a couple of other implementers out of Columbia that we actually really loved. But they, just ultimately from a timing and fit, and there were a number of points there, have decided to go with Andrew. So
awesome. So you talked about as you got more into the formal rollout, you realized your confidence was down to 60, 50, 40%.
Yep.
If you look from a self-implementation perspective at that 60% gap, like if you were speaking to another integrator today who's implementing, themselves, what would you say is probably the biggest blind spot that you had that you're now optimistic to be addressing?
I think our issue was more, it's funny, I was just talking to our CTO about this. Our executive team has had a mentality of "and" for a long time. Let's do this and this and this and this, right? And so one of our big, and I talked about that with the rocks earlier, right? Yeah. Like nine rocks in a quarter for one person. So part of the challenge that we had was basically as we were rolling things out, we tried to big bang it all at once, right? And I think that where that led us was we were, maybe at 85% in 2 tools, and then 70% in 2 others, and then 60% in 2 others. And then some that we didn't even get a chance to touch yet.
Yeah.
So I think that what I would do, and what I had started doing before we had some events that kind of caused us to go off track this year, was actually try to focus on one of the 6 components every quarter. So which component do we feel like maybe we're the weakest in right now? And let's spend a whole quarter and assign rocks that are based on improving that particular component to try to really focus that in.
Just tying it all the way back to the beginning.
Right. So we're in almost, it's funny, Andy and I talked about this at the EOS conference, even with so we've gone through some acquisition and we've grown a whole bunch, and it's like, we were almost thinking what we needed to do is almost a re-implementation. Hey, let's just not that we failed necessarily, but let's maybe start from scratch because we're a very different looking company now than we were when we started this process, right? So core values still fit, passion still fits, all that, everything on the vision page still perfectly fine. But everything, the rest of the tools, let's revisit them and make sure that we're doing them the right way. So that's kind of where we're at now. We've had a couple of challenges from the, I'll call it May through September timeframes they required all of our attention. Where and part of it was trying to figure out what are we going to do with EOS, what are we going to do with an implementer. Where basically we lost a lot of our traction actually. So I don't know if they have a word for that, but we effectively were slipping, right? Yeah. And so now a lot of that we've dealt with. We're not totally back in the clear yet, but we're in a much better situation. And so now we're starting to, as we come into that annual planning cycle, be able to refocus back on the EOS implementation, how we're running the business, stop being reactive to what's happening here in October and be thinking about what's going to happen in October of 26, 27, 28 at this point.
That is awesome. Well, this has been just really cool conversationally. I'm glad you narrowed it down from 37 because I couldn't remember that. But did you say it was lead, impact, respect, and simplify?
Yep.
So
you got it.
You got it so simple that I got it now. I'm never going to forget your core values.
Well, what's funny is when we first came to those conclusions and we were, as an executive team, trying to make sure, we all had to speak the language.
Yeah.
If the four of us couldn't speak at the time, couldn't speak the language, didn't know the words, couldn't explain it, how in the heck are we going to get anyone else in this company to understand it? So we had a funny okay, is there an acronym or something we can do so we can remember? And if you rearrange the letters, you can spell RILS. So we went with we love to keep it, we're keeping it RILS.
Acronyms.
Yeah. And it actually helped. I mean, so I don't do that anymore, but at the time it really helped to make sure we didn't forget them, right?
And I think Andrew actually says, you can remember the Three Stooges, you can't remember the Seven Dwarfs, right?
Yeah, right.
So get it down to 3 or 4.
That's right. So that's funny.
Very cool. Well, this has been hugely insightful. And I think, let's get 6 months down the road and have you and Andy and Andrew back on and talk about the traction that you've gotten, since actually formally implementing.
Absolutely. We'd love it.
So appreciate you.
Yeah, Kevin. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.